So this is part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel being broadcast on the internet under the banner of Baby Angel Geronimo Editions. This is part A on Tuesday, 31st of October 2023. The Guardian is reporting in the last hour online that the Hindutva nationalist fascist regime in India, fronted by the war criminal Narendra Modi, is raising the stakes in backing the Zionist state of Israel against the Palestinians. Modi also engineered India's abstention at the United Nations General Assembly over the motion to start a ceasefire, supporting ceasefire. And Modi's regime is the only one from South Asia that is supporting the Israeli attacks on the Palestinians. We shall be talking more about that in due course, of course. The COVID inquiry that has started in the UK has already included revelations about the extensive callousness, cruelty, lack of concern for the welfare of the people, as shown by Boris Johnson, who was imposed as the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. It says, what is the UK COVID-19 inquiry? It says, the UK COVID-19 inquiry has been set up to examine the UK's response to an impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. For the inquiry's work is guided by its terms of reference. So, according to the news outlet, this started, this inquiry actually started on the 12th of June 2023. And the revelations about Johnson, I'm looking for it. Well, Johnson said, let people die. It's a hard immunity and let the old people die. Boris Johnson's callous policy and the idea of genocide. So this is dated, it's a headset, it's dated 23rd of March 2020. And it's a website called discoversociety.org. And it's a piece bylined to Martin Shaw. So, what this says in the context of the attitude Boris Johnson showed to the concentrated campaign of harassment, lying, and demonization of baby angel Geronimo, it actually goes back to his deep character flaw. On 17th of March, when the extent of the British government's failure to protect the population from the coronavirus had become clear, the respected political commentator Ian Dunn tweeted, the Conservative Party is not composed of genocidal murderers. They're not trying to cull the population, commenting that it's depressing that this needs saying. I'm seeing way too much of this on my timeline. In just in justification, he continued, if the Tories were genocidal murderers, then their last group they would target are older people because that is their actual voter base. A couple of political scientists made the same point. These comments don't read so well now that the Dominic Cummings, Johnson's chief of staff and his principal strategist since the days of Vote Leave in 2016, is credibly reported as having stated at the end of February that the government's strategy was hard immunity, protect the economy, and if that means that some pensioners die, too bad. Or as summed up even more succinctly by a senior Tory, hard immunity and let the old people die. It seems that the voters, or some of them, were dispensable after all. There would always be more where they came from, perhaps from slightly younger people, grateful not to have had their freedom to consume disrupted to protect the elderly. But where does that leave genocide? I work on the topic, and I have to say that even after researching the role of Dominic Cummings in Brexit, and despite his notorious interest in eugenics, I didn't quite see us getting into a situation where this accusation could be made, even half seriously, still less that I would, as an over 70, be part of the supposed target group, probably condemned like many older Italians to take their chances at home should I get the virus, because the minimal supplies of critical care beds, ventilators, and nurses would be dedicated to people in their 50s and younger. Nevertheless, once Johnson said on This Morning on 5th of March that one of the theories is that perhaps he could take it on the chin, take it all in one go, and allow the disease, as it were, to move through the population without taking as many draconian measures. I think we need to strike a balance. And this segment of the interview was widely circulated. It was obvious that something was up, and Cummings's fingers were all over it. When the head of number 10's behavioral policy or nudge unit, the social psychologist Dr. David Halpern, then put the term herd immunity into the public domain, I recalled Michael Foucault's idea of biopower and his explanation that in modernity, power is situated at the level of life, the species, the race, and the large scale phenomena of population, the will to knowledge, page 137. Clearly, modern epidemiology in general operates at this level if we understand race as the human race. What Foucault explained was that genocide is the dream of modern powers in this condition. I think Foucault particularly had in mind the rulers of mid 20th century totalitarian states. But it seems that, as with the nationalist racist fantasy of Brexit, Johnson Cummings also had the dream of planning to allow some to suffer, or in this case, die for the good of the race. 100,000 deaths might have been acceptable, apparently, even though, in a supreme irony, the Chinese communist dictatorship, heirs to Mao Zedong, of the Great Leap Forward, during which between 15 and 45 million died in 1958 and 61, had restricted deaths to barely 3,000. There is a debate about whether the famine which Mao's policies caused was actually genocidal. Michael Mann argues that there was no genocidal intent in Mao's fantasy schemes for crash collectivization and backyard industrialization, which precipitated mass death. The policy was rather like Stalin's earlier terror famine centered on Ukraine, an example of a so called of a callous revolutionary policy rather than genocide. We might, however, argue that despite these origins, it became genocidal as Mao and the leadership which was enthralled to him doubled down on them policy, on then policy, and allowed the toll to escalate to a level unparalleled in modern history. Callas revolutionary policy also sounds about right for Cummings Johnson. You will notice that I can't quite decide which way around to pair them. But unlike Mao, limits to callousness, Johnson had gone on from his on the chin extremes exposition to state that I think it's very important. We have got a fantastic NHS. We will give them all the support that they need. We will make sure that they have all the preparations, all the kit that they need for us to get through it. But I think it would be better if we take all the measures that we can now to stop the peak of the disease being as difficult for the NHS as it might be. I think there are things that we may be able to do. So the issue was always how many deaths are acceptable and with what balance, as Johnson put, with harm to the UK economy. We have subsequently learned that when the Imperial College study reported that the herd immunity strategy would lead to 250,000 deaths with mitigation, 500,000 deaths without mitigation, Cummings realized that the price was too high and became a firm advocate of suppression, which the imperial authors clearly showed was the only alternative. The government then changed track, and their chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, talked of the hope that excess deaths would be limited to 20,000. But despite Cummings' support for suppression, Johnson continued to vacillate, and the University College London study has now shown that we may expect 35,000 to 70,000 excess deaths. It would be argued that the implicit limits, and especially the retreat, demonstrate that there was never any genocidal intent. However, Johnson remains determined to tolerate a situation in which tens of thousands of people will die unnecessarily from his policies, despite having had relatively successful examples of early suppression from China, South Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan. The supposed grown-ups in the room, Valence and the chief medical officer, Sir Chris Whitty, have been prepared to go along with this strategy despite knowing of the horror caused by COVID 19 in China, Italy, and elsewhere, and the depletion of the National Health Services resources. And this article goes Martin Shaw is Emeritus Professor of International Relations at the University of Sussex. The bottom line, his last paragraph, we have found is that while casualties are acceptable if the overall policy aims are widely accepted and the outcome successful, public opinion is intolerant of failure and above all of unnecessary death. If that is true, when the casualties are military personnel who have signed up for life risks, how much more will it be true now that they are innocent civilians? So, whatever you call it, genocide is what has been being done to the British people by Johnson and Cummings. And Johnson lied about bodies, let the bodies pile up claim. Boris Johnson said he would rather see bodies pile high, than take the country into a third lockdown. Sources familiar with the conversation have told the BBC. The remarks were said to have been made last autumn, just as England went into a second lockdown. The Prime Minister has strongly denied saying any praise, describing the reports as total rubbish. Labour's Rachel Reeves urged Prime Minister Johnson to apologise. She called the comment stomach churning. The government is also facing questions over possible donations made to redecorate the Prime Minister's flat and an investigation into leaked information about England's second lockdown. So, newspaper reviews on the BBC today. Newspaper headlines: Israeli soldier hostage freed and ex Prime Minister's, that is Boris Johnson's, decisions made it impossible to fight COVID. This is the item, the I newspaper, which covers the well, it says the paper says that a top civil servant accused Boris Johnson of being unable to lead during the pandemic. Of course. Now, on the front page of the Times, it says balances despair at ridiculous Johnson. So let's read what the Times is saying on the front page. This is the piece based on Martin Reynolds, key aide to the Prime Minister at the time, revealed dysfunction at the heart of government as he gave evidence. Boris Johnson made it impossible for Britain to tackle COVID effectively. The Cabinet Secretary Simon Case told colleagues, accusing Boris Johnson of changing strategic directions every day. The COVID inquiry was shown a WhatsApp message sent by Case to Dominic Cummings, in which Case said he was at the end of my tether with the Prime Minister, who veered between wanting to impose stricter lockdown conditions and opening up the country, saying the UK was pathetic and needed a cold shower. The inquiry was also shown extracts from Sir Patrick Valance's diary, in which the government's former chief scientific advisor accused Johnson of ridiculous flip flopping and said the Prime Minister was not exactly a consistent interlocutor. The frank exchanges between were shown to Martin Reynolds, Johnson's principal private secretary, and it was put to him by Hugo Keith, KC, King's Counsel barrister, the counsel to the inquiry, that if the views were right, it was a deeply unfortunate position to be in. Reynolds replied yes. The email from Case, believed to have been sent in the autumn of 2020, said Johnson's approach made good government impossible. He cannot lead, and we cannot support him under these circumstances, Case wrote. Now, This is all known to baby angel Geronimo, absolutely known. And we have been saying that Boris Johnson is the personification of evil and unfit for purpose and cruel and all these, but this is confirmation coming now. We started talking about the evidence based entirely on the experience of baby angel Geronimo. That was in 2021, but this is 2023, October 2023. And this is the Times. The email from Case, believed to have been sent in the autumn of 2020, said Johnson's approach made good government impossible. Johnson cannot lead, and we cannot support him under these circumstances, Case wrote. He also said the government had a weak team which cannot succeed in these circumstances, highlighting Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson, then the Health Secretary and the Education Secretary, respectively. It has to stop, Case wrote in capital letters. Martin Reynolds was principal private secretary to Boris Johnson as Downing Street struggled to tackle the burgeoning pandemic. Whitty called meal deal eat out to help out the virus. Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer for England, called Rishi Sunak's scheme to stimulate hospitality as eat out to help out the virus. The COVID inquiry has been told, Chris Smith writes. Shafi read out his notes from the time, quoting, "This description of Sunak's Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which offered substantial restaurant meals in August 2020 in an effort to revive the hospitality industry." I think the chief medical officer described the Eat Out to Help Out scheme to you as Eat Out to Help Out the virus. Is that correct? Asked Higo Kitkis. That's correct, Shafi said. Johnson questioned lockdown because people would die anyway. Imran Shafi was questioned about notes that he made of a meeting between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. Boris Johnson asked why the economy was being destroyed for people who will die anyway soon, as Britain headed for lockdown, the COVID inquiry was told. Notes were made by Imran Shafi, Johnson's private secretary for public services, of a meeting between Johnson and Rishi Sunak, then Chancellor, on either March 19th or 20th, 2020. We are killing the patient to tackle the tumor. Large people taken to mean large numbers of people who will die. Why are we destroying the economy for people who will die anyway soon? They read. Asked by the counsel to the inquiry, who said those words, Shafi replied, I can't say for sure. I think it was the first meeting announced on February 28. The biggest damage would be done by overreaction to the virus, according to Shafi's notes. Johnson's communications chief joked that his boss, that is Boris Johnson, was like shopping trolley. Boris Johnson was referred to as a shopping trolley, swerving unpredictably from one direction to another by his own director of communications, Lee Kane, in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Oliver Wright writes, we shall end this because there is a very long series of quotation and statements.